Welcome back to the Perfect Lab Podcast. I'm Mark Jager. This is Mark Kilgore. He goes by Kilgore. I go by Jager. On today's episode, we have Ryan Passey. He's here to talk about his epic driving of his lightweight, aero-loaded, time attack beast of a Miata called the HyperMiata of all things. He pushes his platform to the absolute edge. And let's just say, you're going to need to stay strapped in, turn it up, and let's get ready to hear all the details of HyperMiata. So let's dig in. Ryan, how's it going today, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, just excited to be here. We've been actually trying to connect for a little while. Um, at some point, I remember you were like, "Hey, you want to talk about the car?" And I was like, still building the car. And I was like, "It's like I don't have time right now. Like I got to stay focused, you know." And then it's funny because then during the build, being such a long thing, I'm like telling myself that eventually, of course, when the car's running, I'll have so much free time. Like, oh, I can't imagine. I won't have a car to build anymore. Like, can you imagine all the time I'm going to have? And
What am I going to do with my hands?
just yeah, just lied to myself just to get myself to the finish line on that, I guess. But yeah, it's now I feel like I have less time than I had because, of course, the second you go and do your first test day, you come back with like just a laundry list of like, here's all the things to change, here's everything we need to do, and it's just a stone rolling down the hill. It just
Well,
keeps gathering.
let's at least congratulate you the fact that you've actually finished your build, right? I mean, so many people don't even make it that far, they just give up. You actually completed it. Bravo, a round of applause. I mean, and it's just incredible. It's an absolutely incredible machine.
Well, I appreciate it. I there's been a few evolutions of the car over the years, um, and I'm a huge fan of time attack around the world. And I know that you see these epic builds that are teased. You see a picture of this, all carbon chassis, and big wings and everything, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see this car running. And then, the next thing you know, it's like been 3 years and there hasn't been a peep about it. Or there's a car that you're a huge fan of that's been kicking butt, and then they go, oh, we're gonna make it even better, and that's the last thing you ever hear. It disappears into a workshop somewhere, and I mean, there's so many cars that's the case, and I get it because it's a huge undertaking. It's expensive. It's so much time involved, and people's priorities change, and life happens, and all that sort of stuff. But I the whole sort of impetus for this evolution of the car was really it was sort of building as I was racing, and we were quite successful, like with GTA when I was racing it in its last form. But we had higher targets that I knew needed kind of like a big step change instead of all these little incremental things. And then it was so cool. GTA organized this trip to World Time Attack. It was like 7 years ago now. But when we went and I got to see the cars, I mean, I was fans of all these cars, but to see them in person and like get in there and really look at them, like it was jaw dropping, like to see the level that they're at. Like the lowest class there is those cars are still being built to this high level that we don't see a lot of here in the US. And there are definitely cars that are exceptions to that, but like on average, you're not seeing that sort of dedication, budget, uh, design, everything being super cohesive, everything being top notch. And it sort of just opened my eyes. And so that was why I really ended up going, okay, this is where I want to be. Like that's the target, build a car like that, instead of, don't let yourself take a half measure to anywhere.
Yeah.
But then I knew being that kind of scope of a project, that large of a project, that like there was a big risk of, you know, not completing the thing, getting caught up with 100 other things that could happen, and different focuses and interests and stuff. And it was like I just kept telling myself I wasn't going to be one of those guys that like I had always been fans of, and then the car disappears. Like, so I mean, 5 years is a really long time to just be building a car, just almost every day, just in the workshop, like after hours when I'm done at work. Um, and it came and went. Obviously, motivation, had highs and lows. There were some times where, like, for a week, I didn't even look at the car because, like, I just needed some space. But at some point, or I kept going back to, like, I'm not going to be, the next, Nemo Evo that's like just vanished somewhere, and everybody's like, what happened?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I have to ask you this first. Obviously, you've had the Miata a long time, but I have to ask you this. So you went into the workshop and said, "I'm going to build," after going to World Time Attack, and you said, "You know what? I'm going to stick with the Miata." So why a Miata? Why stick with the Miata platform?
That's fair. And I guess so for people who don't know, I work at Goodwin Racing. I'm the team principal there, and we are Mazda Miata specialists. So for us, like, there's really kind of we don't even ask that question. It's going to be a Miata, and I guess the only thing then we ask is, like, well, which generation? Which version of it do we want to do? And I also own Singular Motorsports. So between the two, I'm pretty busy day to day. So that's then the build ends up being an evening sort of thing most days.
So,
Um,
which chassis is the best Miata chassis?
right.
Ooh, loaded question.
Well, I really feel like I feel like I've sort of found the right mix of things, which is that I have the lightest chassis, which is the NA. It's updated with several things from an NB that have some better geometry, this or that. Um, and then it actually uses a few parts from the NC, like the front hubs. Well, the front hubs are RX-8 hubs because they're beefier than the NC ones, but they're interchangeable. So there's a few NC components. The brakes are it's an aftermarket kit, of course, but it's designed for an NC. And then I've got the visual of the ND. Once we did the bodywork project, I decided to modernize it, and sort of I wanted something that, like, every Miata guy out there, no matter what generation he had, he could sort of connect to it. So I ended up incorporating the ND looks. Um, so I feel like it's sort of the greatest hits of the Miata.
I mean,
But
I love the fact that you brought in the ND looks to it. I think that was I honestly think that was one of the smartest choices you made on the car, just because it makes it look new age. It definitely has a good look to. I like how the NDs look. So to me, I thought that was an incredible pull off on your part. So
yeah, when the ND came out, especially the nose,
yeah,
the shape of the headlights and everything, there's a lot of it that I really liked. Not as big of a fan of the tail design,
yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that way. We do some work with the Fiat 124 as well, since it's basically the same chassis underneath. And I like the tail of that car better and the nose of the ND more. And we always joke about, like, mashing them together. But, like, then when we look at them, we're like, it's so much work in the doors to, like, blend these together. But yeah, we'll probably get into it a little more later. But when I got into the bodywork project, um, you know, I originally the start of the project was this: I've got to put this car on 18 by 11 size wheels because I have to run this particular tire, and then that sort of dictated all the other. It's just a domino effect. You change one thing, it affects everything around it, and so before you know it, you're rebuilding an entire car. And when I got to the bodywork part of that, which was the last phase, I had done everything, all the suspension and brakes and, chassis and, cutting the tub and all that stuff. And then I finally was doing bodywork, and I had sort of just told myself, I'll figure out how I'm going to do that. I have some ideas in my head, but, like, I'll figure out how I tackle that when I get to that. That's what I kept telling myself. And then I got to that point, and I'm like, there's a version of this where I cobble something together, by hand, fabricate some stuff, try to make some molds. The impossible part of that task is trying to make the left and right side of the car, you know, even, actually
Symmetrical.
mirror it correctly. You do that with, there's ways to do it. I mean, I've been doing it for decades, old school, but, like, I just wasn't looking forward to that. And So I got in touch with a great company, Illumisthetic / Epsilon Aero, who had, 3D scanning capability, design capability, and computer, um, CFD ability, all that stuff. And as soon as I started talking with them, and we kind of went through my vision for things, and they started showing me what they could do. It's like you get a new tool, and your eyes are open, and you're like, I could do so many things with this. And so I had always dreamed. I had always said, if I ever had to start over, knock on wood, and build another time attack car, I would do an ND, just because I thought it would look really cool. And so they're like showing me these early renderings after I had sent them kind of like a bunch of input on like, this is what I'm envisioning for this and for that. And I started getting stuff back, and I'm seeing these like just, they're basic, renderings to start, but it's just already, I'm going, wait a minute. I don't have to think about this from like what can I make? What materials do I have? What tools do I have? This is like, we're just designing this computer. I can do anything. And so I was like, guys, we're scanning an ND nose and we're putting it on this thing. I've got to see what it looks like. And like a week later, they sent me a screenshot, and I was like, that's it. And it was like super rough at the time, but I was like, absolutely, we're doing that.
It was a good choice. It was a good choice.
You're
Absolutely.
making a bumper either way, right? So
yeah. So when did you start or I guess when did the car end its last iteration, and then when did you start? Like, when did it go into hibernation and under the scalpel?
So we raced all the way through 2018. Actually had a great Pro-Am season with GTA, where we won every event that we went to, and then won the GTA finals. In 19, I was, we had some higher targets. It was like, okay, we've gotten quicker, but like, we want to be at record pace, and clearly, we need to do some things to get there. And
were you still running limited back then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I have been in limited always with GTA.
Okay.
I've taken another car here or there to do an event because my car was down, in Renan Street, but that car has always been limited.
If you're going to have a Miata, you kind of have to jump to limited because to make it competitive. I mean, it's really difficult within the rule set,
For sure.
So.
There's chassis that you can, that have a higher built-in kind of base level of performance, and those are great candidates for enthusiasts and street. But a Miata, something that would go to Button Willow and do, you do tires on it or whatever, but like, stock, it's going to do a 220. It's like, there's a lot you're going to need to do before you're going to be, anywhere near the pointy end. And the lower classes just don't let you get there. I think that limited is the first class where you actually can. I mean, there's not that big a difference between limited and unlimited, really, right? I mean, tires is your major one.
Yeah, let's not get started on the rules too early in the episode.
Yeah.
All right, so 2019. So 2019, you guys were making some headway, thinking, okay, we're gonna push it, kind of go to that next level, version 1.2.
So the brilliant idea was to add a supercharger to the V6 that's in the car, and because more power is, obviously
more better.
Yeah. And so thinking about the timing, actually we did Super Lap Battle at Coda in early 2019, and we were just off the podium, 4th place. And it was like, I added up, it was like the 3 cars ahead of us had like a combined 2,800 horsepower or something, and we had 300. And so I'm like, we wanted to try to do better at Coda. I mean, Button Willow's kind of like, where, my heart is, but at Coda, power is everything, right? So it was like, okay, obviously we need a chunk more power, so let's put a supercharger on it. So like during the summer, I was working on that, and we got it up and running, but there were a bunch of hurdles, which we can get into later. And so I did GTA Finals 2019 and went slower, which was massively frustrating. And that was when I was like, nope, this iterative thing is not the way. We're going back to square one.
There's nothing that makes a time attacker matter than making changes and going slower.
Oh man. I mean, and
Adding,
especially like horsepower, I
yeah,
feel is like
Yeah.
supposed to be
yeah.
the
The magic button. It's supposed to be the magic, like
you
add it,
just
do it.
add more and you go faster.
Yep.
Big, if you've got a good chassis and your arrows dialed and all this other stuff is done, it's just more power. It's the easiest piece of the recipe.
It just can't be that easy. And then
No,
that leads you
it
down the
never is.
rabbit hole of death.
Yeah,
So-
then you tear the car down to the chassis is what happens.
So I have to ask this. So what was your thought process when you were like, okay, that didn't work. We need to go bigger, badder, faster, need to go crazy. In your head, when you were like, we're going to bring this thing down, what was your initial thought process in terms of what was your expected time and what was your scope of the project, like in your head when you initially said, we're going to be down and we're going to be down for X because we have X, Y result that we're looking for?
Yeah, when I was at World Time Attack, I was hanging out with a friend Tony from UMS Tuning, and we were already talking about, and this is in 2019, so it must have been. It was actually before we had even gone to Buttonwillow and found out that what we had done wasn't working. But we were talking about limitations of fuel supply because it's a direct injection motor, and some of the hurdles we were having just in trying to get it tuned and get enough fuel and stuff like that. And
So sorry, quick question. What engine was in there? Or so you said it was a V6?
yeah, it's called an LFX. It's
Okay.
the V6 from the Camaro. It's shorter and lighter than the V8, and obviously it doesn't make quite as much power, but I feel like it's a really good pairing to the Miata. And in its stock form, it'll do 300 at the wheels on E85, and I mean, in a Miata, that's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great recipe, and I mean, if I tell people, we get people who call and they're like, "I'm thinking about doing an LFX. What do you think?" And I'm like, "Look, if your target is 300 horsepower, you want a nice, naturally aspirated, good displacement, torque curve, and you just want it to be smooth and it does the same thing every single day. Unlike a turbo BP motor, um, absolutely. But if you're like, 400 would be nice.
Yeah.
Don't no, because the whole
Okay.
problem is that it's not an engine that everybody's tuning, so there's no upgrade path. And so that's the hurdle that we started to run into as soon as I said, let's put a supercharger on this thing. So every single piece of the puzzle then becomes a engineer it from scratch problem.
Yeah. So did you get an idea from someone who had been running that, or is that something you came up with on your own
For the
for
putting
the
the engine in,
for the LFX?
the guys at V8 Roadsters, who have been around for decades putting
Yeah.
LSs in the Miatas,
Yep.
at some point back, probably, I'll get this wrong, but probably 2014 or 15. Actually, probably around the time that the LFX came out, and that was in 13 or 12. They looked at it and went, we could do something that's a little less crazy than the LS. And this might actually be a pretty good recipe. And so they put, a kit together, subframe and, cross member and all that stuff that you needed to make it work, and used a bunch of their same components that they already had for the V8 swaps. And so I, being in the Miata world, knew them, good friends with them. And so we ended up, but back in the day, I had a turbo 1.6 in that car because it's a 1990 Miata. It had the original motor. And when I wanted, in the last evolution of the car, when I wanted a little bit more, I had my eye on that and thought that could be a pretty good recipe. And so we talked and I got that going.
Okay, cool. All right. So anyway, going back, Jaeger was asking about scope of the project, sort of what your intent was initially.
Yeah.
So sorry, I know we derailed us, getting us back on track.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I hadn't even mentioned what engine it was. So talking with Tony at UMS while we're in Australia, we're talking about what's the right way to solve this problem, and it's like, okay, get rid of direct injection, do a standalone ECU, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm like, all right, that's there's a few pieces there. And at the same time, GTA was doing this thing with Yokohama where you had a spec tire, essentially. You had to run an AO52 for limited class. They act like 15-inch doesn't exist, tire diameter. So I was like, okay, we're going to need to do something where we can get on, a competitive tire. And I kind of thought that was already going to be the right direction to go because we always ran at a tire deficit to everybody else. Just because, they don't make wide 15s in the same, compounds as most of the other guys are choosing on for their 17, 18, or 19s. So I knew it was a chunk of stuff. But I figured a year and a half. That's about the amount of time that it took me back when I did the last evolution, which was like the LFX swap, which is a whole drivetrain swap. It's not just an engine. And then I updated a bunch of other things while I was at it, did all this, chassis work and this and that. And I was like, yeah, year and a half sounds about.
I mean,
how that went.
I will say, because I'm trying to remember, I can see the tires in my head. The tires that used to run had the like crossing patterns. What were they?
We ran Rivals.
Rivals. That's what they're. Because I remember, I literally remember having conversations with you back in the day where I was like, "What tires are you running?" You're like, "Rivals." I'm like, "Why are you on those?"
It's like, welcome to Miatas.
But yeah, they worked great on the Miata, and obviously you had to do a lot to make those work to your benefit then, and you were doing everything you possibly could. But like you said, having to run the Yokohamas kind of push you in a direction. And you kind of alluded to this already. To put 18s on a Miata, let's dig into this because
How hard can it be?
yeah,
you just cut, right?
yeah, you just keep cutting and cutting and cut. It's like I remember watching this on your Facebook channel or your Instagram page or something, and just being like in awe. Like I think you had like your fender off and you like put the wheel on or had them comparing, and I was just like, how is this gonna work?
Yeah, it's definitely not supposed to. Yeah, it's I'm not the first person to do 17s or 18s. I mean, Andy Hollis did it on his own Miata back in the day. I think Danny George did that. That was a car that he did a little time attacking with. There have been cars before, but they've always been not to say that like they did it wrong or anything, but they never addressed kind of what they did is they basically said, I've got a Miata and I've got to somehow put this thing underneath it. And so then they limit their suspension travel to get it to just not hit and rub. And that's not really going to be your recipe for, a fast car, because you need your suspension to work. So, and your center of gravity gets higher, you've got a 2-inch taller, tire at the end of the day.
I really want people to understand that component in itself. A 2-inch higher tire that you have to fit in that same space.
Right. So, and the way that everybody else had done it in the past is that's 1 inch higher and 1 inch, 1 inch up, 1 inch down. So the ride height gets affected. Then I guess they just lower the coilovers more, and then they limit their travel with bump stops and stuff. So like they have no travel left by the time they're done with it. And the way that I looked at it and I said, okay, I think that the way to do this is obviously you've got to be in a class that's going to let you modify things to this extent. But thankfully GTA's got a little caveat that says that you can modify things for proper suspension travel. So your limitations on what you can do to the chassis are exist except for that purpose. And so to me, it's like, okay, let's ignore the chassis. We'll worry about that at some point, in terms of like the tire running into it. The first thing is you want the car at the correct race height, the ride height off the ground, but you also want all your suspension geometry to be right. And you want to have all your bump travel that you would normally have. We have a pretty, prior to that, we had a pretty good working car, and You don't want to go and put these bigger wheels on there and then all of your handling goes out the window just because you've got more grip, but it's not going to be faster on the racetrack. So the solution was drop spindles, and that shifts the center point of the wheel higher relative to the rest of your suspension pickup points. And so we basically did you've got a 2-inch taller tire, so we did a 1-inch drop change. And so now instead of, the 1-inch down was the easy part, that didn't affect your clearance. Now the car sits at the exact same place relative to the ground as every other Miata, on 15s, but you've got 2 inches of tire going up. And so when you try to cycle that through its suspension travel, now you've got twice as much problem as, the previous guys who had done it. But thankfully we could cut the chassis.
So what did that involve? What were you cutting out, and how long did it take for you to kind of manipulate that into position to make it work?
Well, the rear is.
Let me tag onto that 1 second, because so for a Miata, is it like a unibody where the fender is part of the chassis, or did the fenders bolt off or come off in the rear?
The front is a bolt-on and off fender
Sure, yeah.
on the outer half, but of course, you've got sheet metal connecting kind of the firewall or the shock tower. And on the rear, though, it's a part of the chassis.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can't just unbolt it, cut, bolt it back in. Yeah.
No. So on the rear, I kind of took the approach that you would do like with a drag car and just tubbed it. I wanted to make sure that somebody wouldn't protest that we had taken advantage of that rule to cut sheet metal away and get lighter. So I made sure I measured like the sheet metal gauge of everything I cut out, and made sure that what I put back in, was equal to that and things like that. But it's basically, just keep cycling that suspension up and just keep cutting, and then build a new structure in. You just got a sheet metal arch and just build that back in, reinforce it. A lot of times when you cut into a chassis, you're cutting into something that was designed by a manufacturer, and they've got all these internal like gusseting and different layers and everything. So you try to look at, keeping in mind being a unibody, even if it's caged, this is all load transferring stuff. And so you're, making sure that you're putting enough structure back in, and you're reinforcing, and you're creating load paths where you haven't gone and made things more flexible and, less rigid than what you took out. So the rear was easier because also your rear doesn't turn. The front was definitely where things got real interesting. Normally there's a shock tower and the tire comes up and stays below it. And in our case, the tire comes up and just goes way past the shock tower. And so it had to be spaced far enough out. We're not allowed to move the shock towers for limited class. And so it had to be spaced far enough out, figure out the offset that you need so that it's going to clear your shock tower as it goes up. And then built some sheet metal back in. I cut until you could see through the footwell from inside the car. There's all kinds of funny things that it affected. Like the tire moved so far up, and then if you turn it a certain way, turn it towards like inwards on the backside, it would have run into the clutch master cylinder that's sitting on the firewall. All kinds of things that are like just never normally affected by the tire. So that dictated, okay, we go to a pedal box, let's just get all of the master cylinders out of the engine bay. It's like, and that's that kind of domino effect, you're like, I wasn't planning on doing a pedal box, now there's that, 3 months of figuring that stuff out.
Yeah. And I will say, taking my own previous experience of doing a ramp up build type thing that we thought would take 3 months, that ended up taking us an entire year. You run into stuff like that all the time, and every one of those things, like you said, it's this is going to take me a year and a half, and then for every one of those little things it tacks on a month, 2 months, 3 months, and you find so many of those small little things throughout that it just keeps delaying and delaying. And I have to stress back to the original conversation piece of, you talking about taking a week off here, taking, a couple days off there, but, still just plugging away at it day in, day out. Um, you have to, right? You have to just keep tackling it. But at the same time, it can be so demoralizing to walk into a shop and be like, I was supposed to have this done a year ago, and then, as people say, hey man, Ryan, when you gonna bring that car back out? When's the Miata gonna be done? And it just, again, it kind of demoralizes you and puts you into a hatred section of the build where you're just like, I want to be done, but I keep running into this headache and this thing. So obviously we talked about the wheels and tires and the huge amount of undertaking that takes. And you found your first few problems in terms of cutting away the body and then having to move master cylinders. What were some of the next challenges that really, like, the big high hurdles that just said, Ryan, I'm gonna kick you while you're down type thing?
Well, I was definitely also doing, I was jumping from one project to another, different areas of the car. And I would say that one of the really big ones was something unrelated to the wheels and tires. So there's also answers for stuff related to the wheels and tires. So we could jump back. The fuel system on the car was a whole separate, just kind of, I mean, it was a cool project. I've always said that, like, this car is like my college. Like, this is my ongoing, just I'm school's in session every time I take on a project with the car, because and it has literally been that way. Not to get off on too much of a tangent, but I mean,
I
I've
like
had
it.
this car for almost 20 years. And I literally started, like, fabricating like a spoiler on the car in my garage at the time. And I didn't even work in this industry at the time. And so that car has been my business card and my, how to learn to do things. And each time I take on a project, it's like, okay, here's what I can do, but actually it needs to be this. What do I learn? What tools do I get? What do I become proficient with, etc., to be able to do that next project? And I just keep pushing that with every project. So, uh, going back to things that are kind of a kick in the nuts when you're doing a big project, I try to stay positive about it and look at it as a learning thing. But, so there was stuff with the fuel system that we can get into later. But I mean, as far as the wheels and tires go, the other big one turned out to be bodywork, which I kind of just kept going, I'll deal with that eventually. First I've got to figure out how to make this thing 5x114 lug pattern instead of 4x100. And, okay, what hubs do we want to use? And let's get custom uprights built to do this and that, but it was like, everything's kind of like, I could see what needed to happen. And it was just a matter of plugging away at it. When I eventually got to the bodywork, I had made a couple of things. I've done a little bit of carbon fiber here and there, little projects, but like, I've never done anything up to that scale. And I knew that I basically wanted to do a high level of bodywork. I knew what, if I could do this anyway, I want to build bodywork that would be, fit for a GT3 car. And how do you do that? I don't know. So, step one was, how do you design that and get to a point where you've got molds to make it out of? Well, I guess, sorry, that's skipping a few steps actually, but
I was
and
gonna
then
say, holy crap. I mean, I will say this. Anytime anybody, I mean, I put carbon fiber fenders on my Mustang, and I went to go and this is like click order. They show up at my door. I'm gonna go put them on my Mustang, and immediately I did this, and I was like, I hate this. I regret this. This was a poor decision. Like, the fitment was not perfect, and it just pissed me. And it's not metal. It's not like I can just bend it a little bit and make it go back into the spot and make it fit perfect. It's like, cool, this is carbon. So if I push on this, it just cracks. If I need to cut it, I can't just weld it back, or it just makes it so much, in my opinion, it makes it so much more difficult when you start talking about composites work. And don't get me wrong, I really hope to hear this come out of your mouth, but it's like there's a lot of like YouTube University type stuff where it's like they teach you and they walk you through it, and of course it looks so easy as every YouTuber goes and like makes a carbon. I mean, we talked to Hauke, who made a carbon fiber roof for his Subaru, to which he was like, "I will never do that again, 'cause that was the worst experience of his life." And so he's talking about something that he was able to lay on the top of his car and make a
That's
mold,
not even complicated geometry.
yeah. You're
Right.
talking about, I want to make something with all these complex shapes out of something and fit something that doesn't fit on something, and I'm going to make it fit. Okay, so back to you. So how did you go about this process to go from, I want to do something super cool, I got to figure out how to do the super cool thing, and I'm going to stab in the dark. It probably has a little bit to do with the fact that you're not bona fide rich, and you couldn't just call someone and be like, "Yo, make this for me." Okay, I'll see you in 3 weeks.
Yeah. Well, and I'll definitely shout out to Illumisthetic Epsilon Aero because a good friend of mine, Kendall at Supertech, actually, I was chatting with him at SEMA, and I'm telling him my next thing is bodywork, and honestly, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And he's like, I think I know a guy. He's like, that car over there actually has stuff that they did. Go check it out and everything. I'll get you in touch after the show. And so big props to them because I got in touch with them, and they did a really cool kind of like, okay, talk us through what you're wanting to do. And I'm like, well, I don't even know where to start. Like, here's kind of what I'm picturing. But like, how do I, what's involved in all these steps? Like, somehow this has to get designed, and then, but they walked me through like, here's all the ways you could accomplish this. We can get you in touch, we can do as much of it as you want, or we know people who can facilitate getting that stuff done. Like, when you want molds, like if you want to just have somebody CNC all the molds out of foam for you and send you finished molds, we can point you in the right direction to the guys that can do that. And if you want bodywork made out of those molds, we can get you to those guys. I mean, their thing is the scanning and the design. That's kind of like their wheelhouse. But like, they've got enough connections. They know how all that stuff works. So that talking with them and getting connected with them really made it all like, okay, now I can actually see how,
They
how
gave
this,
you the pathway. They
yeah,
gave you the pathway with the turnoffs and how you're going to get back on the
right.
pathway, and
It,
that can be invigorating too, because now it's not just you're looking at a blank, you're looking at a dead end and going,
right.
because
Yeah.
I will say, from most of our viewers are probably in those type of situations where it's like, I'd like to go from A to B. I don't know how to get from A to B. So those connections to just facilitate that, and obviously it for them, I mean, that's time, energy, money out of their pocket to make those things happen. So like you said, huge kudos to those guys for taking the time and working with you to facilitate all of that to make that happen. So that's awesome.
Yeah. What was great was that they kind of then broke it down into steps, and they were like, here's, this chunk or this piece of the puzzle, step one is going to be roughly this much. This piece of the puzzle is this much. This piece of the puzzle is that. And then it's like, and then, when you get to that point, we've done the design work, the scanning, the design work and everything. And we output this, we could do this or this. If you want to have somebody do this for you, you're probably looking at roughly this cost if you want to do it that way or that. And, at some point I'm going to run out of money.
I only have so much soul, heart.
So, it was a very cool process to get a glimpse into like, here's how that can happen. Not everybody is doing it themselves, right? Like, some people are just picking up the phone and, a long time later, carbon panels show up. So, and it can totally be done. And what's really cool about it is, I mean, if you rewind 10 years, people at my level aren't doing that kind of
No.
a project.
Yeah.
It's not even something that you can consider. I mean, so to be able to have all that 3D scanning done, and 3D scanning existed, but to how would I put it? To have
It
like
didn't
even
exist in a pocket-sized,
yeah,
scanning
yeah,
tool that's running on a laptop.
right.
I
And
mean, let me tell you, like when we 3D scanned the Subaru, the guy the guy that we got to 3D scan the Subaru, he worked for Scaled Composites out of Mojave, and luckily for me, that they promoted their workers to explore other alternatives and how they
oh,
can
nice.
use things. So he was able to take their scanner out and bring it to the shop and actually scan the Subaru in its entirety at the shop using, Scaled Composites scanners. So, so,
Yeah, but see, and that's kind of like not so long ago. You needed to know somebody who worked for like, you know, a really big corporate fabricating place that they would even have the tools necessary, to do that. And you've got to have a hookup. So, and the other sort of piece of the puzzle is like they, the way we chose to go about things was that when the design work was done, they would 3D print life size panels. Those would then become, I tested those on the car, kind of stand back, see what we're working with, and then I would take it from there. It was like, all right, from there now, like we get into the physical fabrication, and that's what I can do. So I'm going to turn those panels with the 3D prints within them into plugs or forms, and then I'm going to make molds off of those forms, and then I'm going to have molds, and then I'm going to make panels out of those molds, finished panels. And I had to do it that way. There's shortcuts. There's versions of things where if you're not trying to make it quite as light or whatever, you could actually have the 3D print be part of the finished product. But there was only one version that I wanted to do. I wanted to do it right. And so, it would, and I had to have, in my mind, I had to have molds. Like to go and race a car, and be sending it through, a corner at 120 miles an hour. And, in the back of your mind, you're like, hope nothing breaks because I can't replace it. Like,
Yeah.
there's no version of that was going to make sense. So,
I actually, I don't want to break into it too deep, but I someone posted on, I think, one of your latest posts or commented, or maybe it was said at the event. I don't remember what, but they were talking about how your panels being like very, bespoke, and they were talking about like, oh man, like I hope doesn't get ruined or hit or something like that because he probably doesn't have any more. So again, like you said, it's very advantageous for you to be in a position where if something did happen, you can make another. Do you want to, rush around to make another front quarter or something? No, but at least you have the capability. And I think that is a hugely intelligent decision on your part. And, you never know what kind of sucker will walk up and say, hey, man, I want to buy this. I want to do the same thing. Ryan, what can you make me? And you can go, yes, I can make you.
yeah, definitely. Actually, Illum Aesthetic asked me, they were like, all right, so is this going to be a thing that people can buy? And I was like, first of all, I don't know where I'd find the time to go make another set, if not forced to, because my car needs it, you know? And that's also, probably not a whole set. That's like, oh, I crunched a panel. I need one
Yeah.
thing. And second of all, like somebody would have to come along who's like really crazy, who wants, to run drop spindles, 18-inch diameter wheels, like all this stuff, because otherwise, like where the wheel arches doesn't even make sense on any other Miata. So the hood vent actually is like the one thing I'm like, I could maybe see somebody wanting this, and so it's like, yeah, maybe if someone comes along and needs, that amount of engine clearance and wants that large of a radiator duct and all that, yeah, there's definitely possibilities.
I
But
think you're underestimating the craziness of the time attack community and the Miata community as a
that's,
whole.
you're
There are
probably right.
crazy guys out there.
You're probably right. But at the same time, also, like the point of it was never to try to sell parts. Yeah, I mean, in the point of racing the car, or a big side effect of racing the car is marketing for us, of course. But not to sell the exact parts that we're developing to go fast on that car. Um, So the point was to be able to replicate it and, have it sustainable while racing it. And, I have like a picture of right before I put the molds all in storage. We set them all out on the ground and like I stood in the middle and it's like, you've got a whole car around you, you know? Actually, the molds are
For
bigger
sure.
than the panels. I mean, they're like an extra foot in every dimension, so it's a lot. Um,
I
but
I'd like
yeah,
to yeah,
yeah, go
keep
ahead.
going. Yeah, keep going, Ryan.
I was just gonna say like 80%, easily 80% of the work. But if you count getting the 3D prints and then turning those into forms and then making molds off of them, that's 90% of the work. I mean, to then just go, okay, I want to make another one of these and to get the mold out, clean it up a little bit, you know, I can make any panel in a weekend. Um, that's nothing compared to the 10 months that the rest of it took.
Oof. This was not gonna be my question, but on the panels itself, how many of those are like multi-piece molds, or are a lot of them just a single piece mold?
Yeah, I definitely tried to we actually in the what they call the engineering phase with the body panel design, really tried to make sure that there were no undercuts where you would get mold lock,
Mhm.
if at all possible, on the shapes of stuff so that you can do a one piece mold. Um, but it was unavoidable on the hood, the fenders, and the front bumper. The front bumper is the worst. It's like it's a four-piece mold.
Oh, wow.
Um, but anywhere that I don't know if you've played with molds before, but like anywhere that your two pieces of your molds, merge is just it's a uh, really hard place to seal, because you're going to vacuum bag everything. So now you've got this like pathway from where you want vacuum to outside to atmospheric pressure that's like really tough to get 100% sealed. You've got a place that like epoxy is trying to creep into, and you're going to have a lot more cleanup on the finished panel. So definitely, if you can do a one piece mold, you've just got this nice, beautiful, clean thing, that's going to output a nice finished panel at
Yeah.
the end of it. So tried to.
So, yeah, so that's actually very good because that leads me into what I wanted to ask you about, which is, and I say that because, um, so for my current project, I was thinking, oh yeah, like I should be able to make a carbon roof, but this is for my Z4, which is a retractable hardtop, right? And, I was looking at it. I think I can do it, right? But then, as I got into it, I was like, okay, I really think that this probably does need to be a two-piece mold, right? There are certain areas where I'm looking at and I'm just like, I don't think that that's going to work. And this kind of gets me to my question of it for you. Obviously, you're someone who's in this industry. You can learn skills that are valuable for ongoing projects. But still, even with that being said, you got to a point where you made a decision of, instead of me pushing forward and kind of grinding this out and figuring out how to do it, I'm going to go to someone else and get their expertise. And not to that level, but I sort of did the same thing where, okay, I'm not going to be able to make this roof to the quality that I want it to be. And I'm going to have to spend so much money learning how to do this that I probably could have bought two roofs over if I just purchased them. Right. Okay. I'm not going to learn the skills, but at some point you've got to sort of make that decision. You have that decision tree for you. What was that decision tree for going to this? I can't remember what, Illumisthetics.
Aesthetic, yeah.
Yeah. Like, at what point did you say it's going to be better for me to go with them than for me to try and make this by hand or figure out how to 3D print something or scan it myself and learn how to do all this CAD and all that kind of stuff?
The desire, I mean, the biggest thing is the desire to have a car that ran. You know, the bodywork was the last puzzle piece. Um, and at that point I was 4 years. By the time I guess when I was talking to them, I was, maybe 3.5 years in. But I mean, it was way too long at that point in my mind. Um, and I knew what I wanted in my head. Like if I could just design it, with no restrictions or limitations of what I could make. There was one version of the car, and then the version of like, this is what I could do if I have to just fabricate it by hand was this other thing that I wasn't nearly as excited about. And definitely, I mean, there's so many cases where I'm like, I'm going to sit down and learn how to do this. It's like this car and this project, like I've bought a CNC machine and a lathe, a mill, TIG welding, all this stuff. And now it's like, okay, well, now I've got this side project of like learning how to do this thing to the point that I'm at least proficient enough that I can go back and do the project that is why I got this tool. But at the point that I was at, wanting to be back on a racetrack 3.5 years into this thing, it was like, okay, there were a lot of pieces to that puzzle that I didn't have figured out. I mean, I needed a 3D scanner, and I looked into it, and it was like, okay, there's a big difference between your cheap stuff and your expensive stuff, and there's a reason that they're using the expensive stuff. Can it be done with the cheap stuff? Absolutely. But typically your biggest, the factor is that it's going to take a lot more time, right? And that's the one thing I've got the least of. And then it's like, okay, now you've got to design this thing. Okay. Like I've been working on getting more and more proficient with Fusion 360 for, CAD CAM, designing parts on a smaller scale, but like to design the body of a car is a completely different program and a completely different skill set. Do I want to try to learn that, And so it's like each of these, and I've got a 3D printer here, like it's running right now, but like, do I want to sit here and try to print an entire car out of that amount of build volume, or buy a bunch more printers? But like to some degree, it's again, just this massive time suck. And so that's where it was like, okay, I've got to talk to somebody about how you do this properly and at least get that guidance and fill in some of the gaps. And then there's certain things that I can do. And I'm sure glad I did, though, because it's like the car couldn't have turned out better. I mean, it was exactly what I hoped to visually and performance wise, what I had hoped to come out with. And so I just felt like I wouldn't have done it justice if I had taken any shortcuts.
I mean, shortcuts, I don't know, that might have been a long cut. But dude, I'm glad you did it that way. I'm glad that the way you did it has made this car come out in such a beautiful manner and just aesthetically pleasing, to say the least. So I think we've brushed. I think we've like brushed over real quick in its current stage. So I want to jump into like the Aero and like your choices in the Aero, because I don't know anything about Aero, but I'm a huge Aero nerd in the sense of I love to talk about Aero, even though I don't know what I'm talking about. But as for the horsepower jockeys out there, I want you to, stun and thrill them with all the thousands of horsepower that you put down on this thing. You briefly touched on it. What I heard was Tony from UMS Tuning made fun of you, and immediately you had to go and get more power. And so he made you do the terrible thing and do a standalone ECU, because only standalones can make power. Dirty tuners, they're always just trying to peddle their wares. But tell us a little bit about the power of the car, what that looks, and then we'll jump into the Aero.
Well, I mean, in the version of things where I was running the stock LFX, it was running a GM ECU, ran by HP tuners. And that was actually one of our big problems. Even though you could use HP tuners to tune that ECU, as soon as you went past a certain amount of deviation from what it was expecting to see, the certain parameters, all these torque tables and stuff would kick in, torque limit tables, and it would start fighting you a lot. And not all of that was unlocked by HP tuners. So Tony spent a while trying to get the thing to behave on the dyno. And he was like, I've changed every parameter and it does the same thing. Every single knob that I can turn, it still isn't making a difference. It's just like you just see this dyno graph that just did the same thing every single time, because the ECU there's some table embedded in it that was stepping in and going, no, no, no. And so a standalone ECU did make the most sense. The problem then is that you don't have a lot of standalone ECUs out there that will run direct injection. And there are a couple. I know lots of people like them, and they are really one of the best out there, but I knew from some prior experience I did not want Motec. They would do it, but I didn't have the pockets for it, and I didn't have the patience for some of the ways that stuff works. And so it made sense to try to get rid of the direct injection, also because there's no upgrade path with direct injection.
Yeah.
There's just no aftermarket for it. We played a little bit with like a higher pressure fuel pump, and just kind of, it was all little changes that you were still struggling with. So it was like, all right, we need to just get rid of all of it. I want a fuel system that just works like a traditional fuel system. It's as scalable as you want, because it's using an off-the-shelf injector dynamics shaped thing. And that got into a whole rabbit hole, because obviously there's nowhere to put those injectors. Thankfully, I did find one shortcut, which saved me a lot of work, which is that particular engine has a very rare variant that ran compressed natural gas as an auxiliary fuel system. It was like in some fleet cars. And so there's actually an insert that goes in between the intake manifold and the engine that has injector ports. And their fuel rail wasn't going to work, but I could at least use that. And it gave me, it solves some things for you, injector angle and all that is all kind of done. But I needed fuel rails. And so that was like a 4-month project of designing. They're actually really complex because it's a V. And so the runners, each of the runners crisscross. And so your fuel rail for one bank has to be on the opposite side, and then has to have these big fingers that get over to the injector on, like in between each runner. And so it's like it's 2 fuel rails, and each fuel rail is like 4 pieces. But like, that's why I bought the lathe, was to make fuel rails.
So were you guys using CAD to model that, or were you just doing it by eye, kind of putting
I
something
did it
on the
old
lathe?
school. Yeah, old
just putting
school.
it on the lathe, figure it out, make some small
just mocked
changes.
it up and welded the fingers together with like a little jig that I built, and machined the rails. And I spent like a week learning how like all the little details of how O-rings work, and like the exact compression percentage that you need, and all that stuff, so that these multi-piece rails would seal. Last thing I wanted to do was like put 4 months into building these things, and then like you put fuel into it the first time and then got a bunch of leaks.
Yeah.
That was a whole thing. But I mean, once I had that, plug the DI ports in the engine. There's a whole other piece of the puzzle, which is you're going to go to a standalone. Now you need to rewire. Well, so what we wanted to do, of course, let's do it right. Let's do an ECU/PDM. So we did a Haltech Nexus R5. And so now every wire pathway changes because of the PDM. So completely new. Then we didn't save a single wire from the previous version of the car. There's a great company, Magic Developed, who's actually owned by a old buddy of mine that I used to race Miatas with, compete with, Justin Ross, and he had eventually later on moved into this company that did, one of their specialties is building wiring harnesses. And so I designed the whole thing in the computer, sent them the drawings, and they basically built the harnesses for me. Which is weird. I mean, I don't know what I was doing for 5 years, because it's like I did have other people doing pieces of stuff, but all new wiring.
I like the random thought of, what was I doing?
What was I doing with all my time? Yeah, seems like a lot of other people were contributing stuff, but
maybe it was the running of 2 businesses and trying not to starve and have enough money to pay for any of the stuff that, because I mean, I don't want to harp on the money thing too much, because money, racing, we're just lighting it all on fire anyways. But I mean, people really have to understand a lot of this stuff. It gets held up, right? You can only do so many things at one time, because you only have so much cash flow. And so you're having to be like, okay, I imagine you probably ran into the same struggles that we all run into. It's the constant commotion of like, I want to do this and I want to do this right, but I have X amount of dollars to do it right. It takes double what I have, triple, quadruple. And so it's how do I make my X dollars make it so that I can accomplish this to the perspective that I want to. And so you're constantly on that power struggle. And I imagine you were kind of just like me, where you did everything you possibly could. You begged, borrowed, stole, literally. Like I know for me, like you talked about going to SEMA and getting in touch with the right people. Those type of actions make huge contributions to programs like this. So, sorry, I'll let you tell the story, but I imagine it's probably very similar in that sense of just, you got the right people at the right time to do the right thing. I mean, it's amazing how, the world kind of either helps you or hurts you at different times during these projects.
I mean, the budget thing is absolutely, one of the major hurdles with any kind of time attack thing. And I mean, I know, we did a little bit of work together
Yep.
back in the day on your Subaru, and I know, I saw you building and campaigning that car, and so I know it, better than most. I mean, it's definitely a struggle, and it's like you get in, you have a lot of times where you kind of take a step back and you look at things and go, how bad do I want this?
Yep. Yep.
you know I mean, for me, like, I kind of got to a point where I was like, I have my main job that pays the bills, and I have a second job that builds a race car, and I just chug away at both of them every day because I've got a race car that I've got to finish, and it hasn't gotten any cheaper, since I finished the car. And then you get into like, more recently, it's like every time you order something, you might as well get two, you know?
Yep.
I mean, and thank goodness, because I mean, we can probably get into it later, but like we've had a bunch of drivetrain damage from that last event at Thunderhill. And it's like, I've already got axles and I've already got a few other things. And there's still a bunch of things that I've got to fix or repair. But like, it's because you need to have those spares, and then you pack all those spares every time you go to at least to a competition that, is significant, because you don't know what you're going to need,
Yep.
and the last thing you want to do is have invested all of that, all just to be there. And then it's like, if you have this one part, you could, save the weekend, but you don't, so it's like, you just start ordering multiples of everything. It's like Brad Abrams. I met him back when he worked at Stop Tech. He used to work at NASA, and he had, I don't remember the exact saying, but at NASA they had a pretty funny saying that was something like, if you think one is expensive, just think how much more two will be, you know, because they're all about redundancy.
Yep. And you have to. I mean, kind of some of the bonus to the upgrading of cars in a piecemeal fashion is you tend to end up with, like, I upgraded, like in my case, it was like, oh, I upgraded and I bought a sequential gearbox. So I have a stock 6-speed gearbox that I have as a spare. So it's like, yeah, I'd be going down in terms of my capabilities, but at least I could finish the weekend or something of that nature. When you're building something to this level of custom, you don't get that opportunity to just say, well, I have the old one. You can't go, well, I have the old BP motor and transmission. We'll just throw that back in. That's just not going to be an option. Here at the Perfect Lab Podcast, we're happy to introduce Whoosh Bespoke Wheels as a sponsor of the show. Whoosh Bespoke was born out of necessity. Their race team struggled to find wheels that offer the perfect fit, strength, durability, and that big old thing, a reasonable price. The people behind Whoosh Bespoke are racers and engineers seeking engineering excellence, and they offer precision forged wheels crafted by racers for racers, with a product lineup that includes a wide range of options from monoblock to modular wheels, including 2- and 3-piece wheel designs. All engineered from the finest materials, although they do primarily use 6061 T6 forged aluminum, but they do offer things as high of quality as a magnesium alloy. So this really can work for any setup you're trying to go for. Customization is at the heart of what they do at Whoosh Bespoke. You can tailor your wheels with custom sizes, offsets, finishes, and even options like custom lettering, adding two-tones. Their colors include both standard and premium finishes, as well as special finishes like brushed, hand-polished, and even paint to sample. Every set of wheels produced exceeds the JWL standards and meets the rigorous WCEC quality standards, and they are tested by real people with real cars racing all around the world. And guess what? Me and Kilgore, we're also going to be part of that team. So we're going to be putting these things to the test. We're putting them on our cars. Kilgore's going to be repping out and going through all the time attack season. I'm going to be beating them up at HPDE days and just having a good time with them. So I want you to go take a look at them and make sure you give them a follow on all their socials. It's whooshautomotive.com, Whoosh Automotive on all the socials. Go check them out. What's the transmission? What's your working on the transmission? Is it, I can't remember, honestly, is it flappy paddle? Is it stick? Because, you can't have flappy paddles in that class?
I think that might, don't quote me, I think that might have changed. I think you can now.
I think you probably can.
Yeah.
Like you said, we've basically just made it so unlimited is a tire change away. So
it is a little crazy. And it's funny because, I mean, I started building the car into what, at the time I'm holding a rule book for 20, at the time I'm probably looking at like a 20, well, when I started 2019, 2020 is probably the same rule book, but a lot has changed. Yokohama is not the spec tire anymore. So I'm still happy about the change that we made because now we can run on equal tire to everybody else, regardless of what, the rules evolve to allow. You'd still be at a deficit if you didn't have that ability. It just happens to be a Hoosier or a Goodyear or whatever now instead of a Yokohama. And actually Yokohama's still pretty good.
Yeah. Even though you can run a 60 tread wear, you still run a 200 tread wear.
Don't get Mark started.
What tires win limited class? The 200 tread wear. What? You don't even.
Yeah.
So sorry. So what's the transmission that you're running in the car? And what's it getting activated by?
It's activated by your hand, which is really old school. And it is actually, speaking of budget, it was one of my budget decisions that I made back in 19. At the time, you couldn't run a sequential. That was one of the things that jumped you to unlimited. And so I did a Jericho 4-speed dog box, which the other thing was, hey, I can have one of these for, I think that at the time, Jericho's actually gone now. They actually closed recently. But
really?
At the time, you could get like the actual transmission itself for like $4,500. To put it in a car that wasn't normally running that, you've got all these other things you've got to develop. But, I was like, yeah, I could conceivably like have a spare of that. That wouldn't be that bad, versus a sequential. It's like,
15,
12.
20.
And then, to double that is like, oh, wow, that's a lot, So yeah, just a H pattern 4-speed dog box. At COTA, our second day, we had already had a pretty good weekend, but our second day was ended short by losing the transmission. And that was on the Camaro transmission that normally comes in the Camaro behind the LFX. So my main goal was I want a transmission that's never going to end my weekend. And the Jericho's like, they quote some ridiculous number that it'll handle, 1,200 horsepower or something. And so I was like, that'll never be a problem for us. And it's been really fun finally getting the car on track. And, I bought the transmission in like 2019. And so now here I am in 2026 getting to finally drive it. And I'm like, that's my first time driving a race transmission, that's not something with synchros and everything. And so it's like, I was talking to the other Ryan at, with the V8 at Southwest Speed Festival. And he's like, I don't remember what I mentioned to him, but he was like, what do you mean you're clutching on your upshifts? Like, I don't know. It's like, no, man, just pop off the throttle for a second and slam it in. And I'm like, wait, that's like how I shift on a motorcycle. And like it clicked in my head. And I went out the next session. I'm like, this is awesome. You know, like
nice.
it's been really fun to finally get to enjoy some of that stuff that, has just been a long time, in the making.
So I'll make one statement. This is not directed to Ryan, but to anybody who's out there is listening, maybe some up and coming time attackers. You should definitely think about, as Ryan is talking about, there are times when you're going to need spares, when you're going to need extras, when you're doing upgrades. That could be a great time to reach out to a company, to a partner. You're like, hey, I want to buy your X. I would love to have a partnership where I want to buy one, but actually it'd be great then if I could get a little bit of a break because I'd like to have two, right? Maybe you could give me a little bit of a discount, or they may, you can see what you can work out, but that may be a great time to start developing some of these relationships. Control arm, something with brakes, or, some of these things where, okay, you go off, you bend a control arm. It'd be great to have backups instead of, those sort of things. That
I mean, what's the worst they can tell you? Piss off? Because you're gonna buy it anyways.
Yeah.
If they give you
Exactly.
$5 off, you save $5. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I realize that, especially for, most time attack stuff is amateur. And, for most amateur racers, who are self-funded and, it's just a money pit, it's not making the money. The idea of, buying spares of everything is a luxury that's, kind of like, yeah, no, that's not happening. I'm just trying to put a car together. But I mean, I think that it is good to put together a list of like, go down the list of everything that's on the car. Like, what are the things that are most likely to break? I mean, you're never going to anticipate everything, but and there's a limitation to like what you can put in the trailer and whatnot, but yeah.
And what's easily fixed, right? Like, I'm also like, this is probably going to break. If it does break, I'm not taking out my whole engine, right?
Right.
Hey man, that's why as a Subaru guy, you always had to have a Subaru.
Those things are small.
Motor ready on the stand. I'm not lying, man. We went to like Atlanta and stuff like that. Subaru motor was packed in the trailer.
That's required though, just so that the engine that's in the car knows that it's there and is like, okay, never mind.
It gives a little fear. It says, hey, there's a friend. It'll and then you'll never need it when you pack it. It's when you don't pack it is when you're gonna need it.
Yeah,
100%.
You should also, again, I like what you said there, Ryan, which is, make a list. You should also try and think about, are there multiples of things, but I only need one, right? It's like, okay, for a control arm, right? I'll go back to a control arm, right? If they're the same control arm, the right and the left side, or especially if we're talking about, some sort of spherical bearing or something like that, where it's like, okay, if I break two of these, then I've probably done something really bad. I can probably get away with one if I just mess up one side, right? So it's like, okay, I'll bring half of the spares, right? Like I don't need a full set. I'm just going to bring half a set, but that could run on either side, depending on what happens. So,
my spares box has one end link.
Yeah.
But it's the same end link on all four corners,
Yeah.
And there's definitely plenty of opportunities for that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I wanted to go back, which we talked about the engine, but that kind of took us quickly down the path of the standalone. So are you still running the
Yeah.
LFX? And is it turbocharged now?
Supercharged.
What do we got? Supercharged. Okay.
Supercharged. So all of that, standalone, delete the direct injection, etc., was all to make it possible to put a supercharger on it and then be able to control it, give it the amount of fuel that it wants, all of that. So I decided to do a Rotrek supercharger, which is a centrifugal blower. I really like them. There's kits for them on Miatas. They're linear in their power delivery, boost builds with RPM. You could argue against that, but for mechanical empathy, I like the idea that for the fact that I was trying to make a decent amount of power with a relatively short wheelbase car, having a smooth power delivery made a lot of sense to me instead of something that there's a whole reason I actually never went with a V8 back when I was originally looking at doing something other than a Miata motor. Was I thought, if you want something that's loud and thundery and just puts on a a show and makes a bunch of tire smoke, that kind of like the old Cobra recipe, then a V8 and a Miata makes sense. But if you want to make a scalpel,
We'll call out Ryan Redukel right now.
and obviously there's at the time, when I was deciding, 2016 or so, when I'm thinking what engine do I want to put in this, I really looked around and there was like no fast, proper fast lap time V8 Miatas. And I was like, something's going on here. Sometimes people just don't, that's not what they do with their car, but like nobody was really setting the world on fire lap time wise with a V8. And definitely people have come along since then and, are doing super quick times with them. There's absolutely a recipe for it. But I wanted to try something else, and yeah.
So do you have any issues? Do you guys feel like you're pretty on top of cooling and keeping everything and the charge temps and stuff like that with the supercharger in check so far?
Yeah. That's another benefit of the Rotrex is that it's got its own cooling system. As long as you keep it running within its temperature window, the thing is dead reliable. It doesn't generate a lot of heat, like in terms of that affects anything else. Obviously your intake air temperatures go up, and so you put an intercooler in there. But like aside from that, like all the heat that you get from a turbo doesn't exist with that. So that's another kind of cool factor. If you have an oil spill, you don't have a glowing hot turbo that you're spraying stuff on.
Yeah. That's fair.
There's a bunch of like little kind of perks.
Yeah. And how much power are you making? If you
So-
you can give us a round number, we don't have to know the exact.
I've actually never told anybody, but it was 300 horsepower when it was naturally aspirated. My goal was that I wanted to see a 5, and we've got 5 different pulley sizes, but we kind of have 3 main increments, and the smallest pulley spins it to its red line, and we've got basically anywhere from 450 to 550. And that is handy, like for Southwest Speed Festival, which they kind of do their own recipe. It's power to weight. We picked a pulley size that got us to, kind of be roughly in the right, zone for the class we were going to run in. Obviously for time attack.
So let's point this out. The 2 top cars in limited right now are both just a tick over 500 horsepower. Right. And really, Bailey and his E36 M3 has only just ticked over that 500. He was running 400s with his B48, for ever since he sort of started that. He might have even started in the high 300s. Those don't make a ton of power, but and obviously Ryan, you as well, running anywhere from 400 to just over 500. Which obviously both of your cars are incredibly lightweight. So that is, that's always the recipe. Where are you at on weight?
I would have to look at I've got a spreadsheet for everything, but we're somewhere around 2450 to drive right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So look, you don't have to have a lot of power to compete.
Well, yeah. More and more power it is not just, a instant faster lap time, right? Create a whole bunch of new problems. And not to say that we're not trying to make power, obviously, but especially in a short wheelbase car, and trying to make something that I can drive consistently and precisely. It feels really good. I'm really happy with kind of how the car feels at that level. And we're spinning the supercharger to red line. So, we're making the most out of it. It's still a stock block, or stock long block, like stock internals, junkyard motor. We don't really know what the limit is of it. Because again, no aftermarket, upgrade pathway for that engine. So, but it seems to be liking it. And, we wouldn't run, the small pulley at every event, certainly not for testing and stuff like that. But we did run it for Thunderhill. For day 2, it was like, okay, well, like we have it, let's throw it at it.
I mean, I'll be interested. This is gonna sound really screwed up. I'll be interested to see. I want to see the motor have some struggles, because that's going to promote you to have to be like, okay, we're going to have to build this. If we're going to build it, we might as well go make more power. So, I mean, maybe a little bit of hopes and dreams, but I also think like you and as Bailey has already proven as well, it doesn't take 800, 900 horsepower to turn a fast lap. And obviously this is, again, a very specific situation when you talk about like, okay, let's go to Coda. Is there going to be a difference in your lap time between a 500 horsepower car and a 700 horsepower car? Well, absolutely, right? Like, you would love to have 800 horsepower at Coda. At Road Atlanta, you'd love to have that kind of horsepower. But at the same time, like, you go to Button Willow, are you going to be screaming for 800 horsepower? Or are you going to be like, no, I can put down a heater at 500 horsepower? And so, okay, I can definitely see the concept there. I think that it'll be interesting as the season goes on, and obviously we'll talk a little bit more about what the events you plan on going to. But just looking at like an event schedule on the West Coast with GTA, with Thunderhill, and then going up to the Ridge, and then going back to Button Willow. I don't look at the Ridge and at Button Willow as two tracks that are just like, Ryan, you got to go make this thing make 800 horsepower tomorrow, otherwise you're just going to get decimated. I don't see that as a case. So I think you guys are in a prime position to take victories and set records definitively with the power levels that you currently have. So I think you're in a great place. What would you? I'm gonna throw the random question out there. What would you, as an ideal situation, what would you love to see the car make? Power.
Oh, horsepower wise, I've definitely learned that there isn't, that just quick solution where if you throw more horsepower at it, it's obviously going to be faster. There's something to be said, particularly for me, to having something that will turn laps instead of just being a one lap wonder. I'm far from a professional driver. Like, I need laps to warm up, and it takes me a minute to switch on and attack. And I'm always quicker on day 2 because I've been able to think about it for a day and, for an evening, and think about all the places that I really should be pushing a little more, and, all that sort of stuff. So the more laps that I can do, the quicker I can get. And so having something that, you can go out there and do 2 laps in, like, if that recipe isn't going to be successful for me, and you can put, obviously, you can put somebody in the car who is capable of that. There's those aliens out there,
Yeah.
but, there's something about, sort of the quest to go faster doesn't make any sense to me if you're not the one behind the wheel. So, then you're just a builder, and that's 50% of it, but it's not the whole thing.
I mean, we've
and so
definitely had that experience where there are people out there that are builders, and they love to build, and they understand their limitation as a driver, and they go, I can build this, but I can't drive this. I don't think that you're in that category of I can't drive this, but I mean, definitively what we've seen, I mean, just at Thunderhill, me and Kilgore sitting there watching you turn laps, and it was like, okay, he did his first lap. Okay, second lap's faster, third lap's even faster. And you could, like you said, we could see your confidence build each lap, each session. Every session that you went out, it was a consistent growing spurt. And we kind of, I think in the moment especially, we kind of attributed that to, this is a very new car to you that you just spent 5 years building, that you're still, you've got some test. You went to Chuckwalla, you did the test days out there, turned some amazing lap times. And you've done some other test days at some other locations, but you're still honing that in. You're still getting yourself attuned to that car and to the speeds. I mean, this is the fastest car you've ever driven, I assume.
Oh yeah.
Like you're just like me and my Subaru, where it's like, there's not another car you can go hop in and get test laps with that is going to drive like this car. So you physically have to go out and drive this car, and like you talked about, and that's where the repeatability and having the power level not so incredibly high that you can't just drive it, really makes it beneficial to you to be able to drive the car on a consistent basis, to get the feel, to get the understanding, and continue to like really build yourself and the car into a very capable and potent machine.
Yeah, 100%. You know, and it's like, yeah, there isn't some other car to go hop in and get a bunch of laps in that's going to be even remotely close. So, yeah, when you go and do laps to learn a new track, you know, in the sim, and you're like, okay, what car do I pick? It's like you pick a GT3 car, right? Because it's like you need something where you're kind of just roughly approaching things at the similar speed, you know. So yeah, you're not just gonna have like a test car. um, but yeah, the Thunderhill was uh, a new car, you know, relatively speaking, that we're still learning, still figuring out, and I'm still warming up to being confident in what it will do, as well as a new track, and that's not
Oh
an
yeah.
easy track to be green at. So that was even after doing all the sim time and going, oh yeah, that's kind of a tricky part. Like to nothing prepares you for some of those blind sections. I mean, it's like, you know, Laguna Seca's got the corkscrew, which you go into and get on the brakes, you know, while you're still blind, you can't really see where, you know, you just know where to get on the brakes. Like Thunderhill has 4 of those, you know, you know, some of them you're supposed to be accelerating, you know, before you can see where the car is gonna end up, you know. It's like super fun, super fun. But I mean, it's very clear that, you know, the more laps you get, the quicker you're going to get with it, because you just do not go into that, you know, that type of a track just huck it in the first session. Like you have to know, you know, you have to have the muscle memory of 1,000 laps there to finally be confident to throw it over a crest, you know, and trust that you're lined up right.
So I want you to give us a quick detail of the Aero, and then I want to jump right into that Thunderhill event and give us some exploits of that. So give us a. I know this is asking a lot. Give us a quick rundown of the Aero that you developed for the HyperMiata.
Well, I mean, it's fairly simple overall. You have, you know, the body is obviously, you know, all new, and so there are things like, you know, evacuating air out of the fenders and things like that that are just kind of like no brainer things that you do. And you know, you can do 100 different shapes that accomplish basically the same thing, so you know, try to make it look good and everything. But the major things for any car are going to be a splitter and a wing. That's where the majority of your downforce is coming from on a, you know, modified production car, you know, that doesn't have big tunnels underneath it. um, the front of the car is actually one of the few things that got the splitter is one of the few things that got carried over from the old car. We were running that splitter uh, for a couple of years back in the old form of it, and actually, so great friend of mine, Moti, over at Blackbird Fabworks, is kind of like, he and I are both just aero nerds, um, you know, and you know, all self-taught, you know, just being obsessed with it. Uh, sorry, and the splitter is kind of our um, kind of mad creation. You know, we built that out of we built a mold for it, and that was the first thing that we made out of really proper thing that we made out of carbon many years ago. Um, Everybody notices it's kind of, if you know, the most similar thing to it is the Hammerhead, you know, 240SX from World Time Attack. It's a very simple or similar concept. There's a lot of ways to make a lot of downforce on the front of the car. Um, Wings, you know, airfoils on the side of the splitter where it moves past the bumper is one of those logical ways to do it. Lots of cars are doing that. You know, I think about like Willow Young's Civic. You know, I mean, that was 100% the same thing, just a little more hidden, a little more of a, you know, sort of organic 3D shape compared to like a straight airfoil shape. But we were kind of dealing with what we had. So We had airfoil shapes, so that's what we did. Pretty good size splitter, to just get a lot of pressure on the nose. And then at the back, another sort of creation that he and I came up with. We used to run a GT1000 APR wing, and we got to the point where we were making a front downforce that we kept needing more and more rear downforce, which is a great problem to have because
Yes.
typically you can dial in more rear and you're limited on how you can, how much more front you can add. And we got to the point where we were maxing out the GT1000. And at that point, you're making enough downforce that, like, even though it was chassis mounted, we were like bending the frame and like stretching the pinch welds and like sort of tearing the car apart from the downforce of the wing. And it made a lot of drag. Like that thing, I think the max angle when you measure it, it's like 40 degrees or something at its maximum angle of attack. And like at that point, it's making massive drag. So we were like, all right, we need something that makes more downforce than what we're making. Actually, would be nice, and less drag. And how do you do that? And Moti had the idea. He's like, hear me out. We should put two GT250 wings together and make a dual element that's just massive. Like these are 10-inch cord each, and now you have this 20-inch cord thing. But the idea is you can run it a lot less angle because you have more surface area. The downforce that you produce is just a result of pressure per square inch. So add more square inches. And then you don't have to run as much angle of attack. So we dove into that and we were developing that in like 2020. And it was super funny because we had it on the car. And I think it posted a couple of pictures. And then he messages me one day. He's done a little bit of work here and there with Andrew Brilliant. And Andrew sends him a message. He's like, check this out. And it's CFD data for two GT250s together. And he's like,
Nice.
son of a, like, we haven't shown it yet. And, because we were waiting until the car was done to like show it off and everybody be like, what is that? And the next thing you know, like Will's going up Pikes Peak with the GT, what they call the GT2000. And I'm like, well, on the plus side, we can see the CFD and we know it works really well, because we were just kind of going, this should work.
That's got to give you some confidence that, multiple people came to the same idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not a huge fan of how they lock the second element in place. So we're running an off-the-shelf GT2000 right now. And in the background, Moti and I are working on kind of an evolution of the concept. But, we're always, working on the next stage of things. But
what did you do to address the issues with the frame and the car? I mean, if you're making even more downforce,
cut it all out, build it all over again.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
The limited lets you modify the frame ahead of and behind the shock towers.
Okay.
Ahead of the front and behind the rear shock towers. And so behind that rear shock tower, it's free reign. And so I just chopped everything off from there and built a tube structure that its job is to support that wing and transfer all the loads directly into subframe and frame rails. And it actually ties into the cage. So the cage becomes a stressed member with the wing. And so, and then, rebuild your trunk floor, thin aluminum, stuff like that. Everything that's not load bearing, make it light.
Was there any consideration given to, okay, we need more downforce. All that downforce doesn't have to come from a wing. We could go we could add a diffuser. Obviously there's a little more complication there, but we might end up with less drag.
Yeah, what's your underbody situation like?
For sure. Well, when I
I say all that because right now you just have, you've basically just got nothing in the back, just letting air try and, move out from under the car as quick as possible.
Right. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Bailey is doing the same thing right now.
Yep.
When I started building this version of the car, the limited class rules didn't allow a flat floor.
Yep.
And
okay,
a diffuser doesn't make sense at that point. You're barely, the downforce you're making is the weight of the diffuser. So coming up with a concept that we thought would be competitive and do really well in limited was built around that assumption that we would not have a flat floor in a diffuser.
Sure, that makes sense.
Rules
Yeah.
rules changed a couple years ago. You can do it now, but there's sort of like a I'm not in a hurry to do that. First of all, the undercar aero is the most difficult part of the airflow around the car to get right. There's a lot of things you can do on the exterior, the top and side surfaces of the car that it's like, with little variations, like you can't almost get it wrong. I mean, there's obviously ways to do it better than others, but like you're gonna make downforce, but the undercar is a lot more tricky to get right. And also we couldn't do it flat bottom. So it was like, I'm not in a hurry to do that. I really want to sort of prove out the concept that we came up with. Um, we may evolve the car in the future to incorporate that stuff. It's something that obviously is, um, I guess you could say untapped potential. Uh, but yeah, I'm I'm not in a hurry because the car's working really well. The only thing is it does make a lot of drag. I mean, you don't make downforce without drag, and
Yeah.
certainly the downforce you could make with the floor uh, could be, that's kind of your lowest drag penalty stuff,
Hmm.
downforce wise. So there could definitely be some improvement in drag there, and then trim out some of the stuff on the top side that is creating a lot of drag. But I mean, I just know that we're making a lot of drag because like you compare our like front straight speeds to basically anybody else in the class, and despite making a lot more power than we're still like the slowest car down the straight. And not everybody has as big of a wing, so it's kind of easy to see why.
I mean, I will
But
say this: flat bottoms, doing, making sure to do them right. Man, they can also be the biggest pain for maintenance and like
mhm.
trackside support aspects. So you really have to always think of serviceability when it comes to flat bottoms as a whole. And so I always tell people the same thing. Like if you're thinking about a flat bottom, make sure you have a good engineering mind behind it because it is just gonna ruin your life at the track if you just try to slap a bunch of panels on. And I mean, I've seen people with like fasteners directly under the car and then they're getting ground down, makes them really hard to pull off. And then it's a nightmare. So you really have to be cautious on all those things. So yeah. So let's get into it, man. Let's talk about Thunderhill a little bit. Me and Kilgore were out there, we were calling the shots, telling you guys how good or bad or how sucky you were. And you guys were having a good old time there at Thunderhill. So kind of give us a rundown of that event. Obviously, probably the one of the biggest time attack events you've been in quite some time.
Oh,
Um,
definitely, yeah.
and I mean, you had to come out swinging from the get go, and like you said, you were at a bit of a disadvantage in the fact that you've never been to that track before. So, kind of give us a rundown of from give us a start out. How'd you you said you prepared with some sim work?
Did some sim work. There's it just seems, things evolve and events and organizations decide to move to this track or that, and so it's like what we're stuff that we're looking at doing in the future that would be fun to do all look like a track I've never been to. So the decision was made that it makes sense to get a sim and be able to practice, just at least get up to a level of familiarity with that new place long before you're actually sitting in the car. And I'm sure I haven't downloaded Button Willow yet, but my focus was to learn Thunderhill first. But I'm sure that there's a lot of benefit as well to just, hey, I haven't been to Button Willow in 6 months, like let's fire that up and just get some reps in. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Pretty preoccupied with fixing the car at the moment. But
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
yeah. Yeah, so I prepped with some sim time, watched a bunch of videos. Um, Justin over at Magic Develop, they run BMWs in T25, so they've got a lot of laps there, and so he gave me a little bit of a kind of you know rundown, of like here's what we find are the tricks to being fast. Here's what isn't immediately obvious. Usually people aren't figuring this out until several times there and stuff like that.
For
Um,
for the Thunderhill 25, do they run the same course or do they run a different extended
No,
lap?
same. They
Same
run
one?
the
Okay.
east with the bypass. Yeah.
Okay. Alright.
And so he actually sent me a couple of videos. Also, he's like, see what I'm doing here and stuff like that. So all of that was super, super helpful. Um, and I was just, man, I'm so excited. I mean, the car, we've been out with the car. We did Southwest Beef Festival. We've done some test days, but like I've been building the car for 5 years to race with GTA. Finally, we're here. It's a GTA event, right? So just to show up, to be registered and to pull out on the track to see, JD and, all these other people that, it's like, some of them I haven't seen in 5 years. That was like a win. Um, that was really fun. That was really cool. And, then it's like, okay, like, let's see where we stack up, like, that Bailey's going to be fast. He's obviously, we went in knowing that he was going to be the benchmark. You've seen him running recently and crushing it. So it's like, all right, well, let's see where he's at and let's see how much work we have to do is kind of how we went into it. And who knows, like how many other fast cars are there going to be? Like, are we going to be anywhere near the podium? Like you don't know. And so it was a pretty good field in the teams for cars in limited class. Definitely some fast cars. So that was very cool to see. And the first day was all just getting those reps in, getting more and more comfortable with things. I mean, Bailey went out and did a killer lap on like literally his first lap because that's when the conditions were good. I got faster every single session because I just, wasn't there. It was going to take time, but, really happy with how everything was feeling. And we did all our normal little things, tire pressures, try to optimize that, make little tweaks to the car. We had a funny, I, I'd have to go back and see what it was like on the live stream. But like the very first session when we all went out and they had the course configuration wrong,
Oh,
I'm sure
yeah,
you guys in the tower were like, "What is going on here?"
We were all excited. We were like, all right, we're going to do the, what they call the crow's nest. We were like,
Yeah.
oh, this is going to be awesome. Like, it's going to be crazy seeing the cars going over the top.
Dude, we come around the corner and like the cones are lining you up to go over the crow's nest. And I'm on the radio going, somebody go tell somebody it's set up wrong. And I'm sure like 10 other drivers are doing the same thing at the same time, And it's like, oh my gosh, I guess it's kind of fun that I got to go over it one time, but like talk about blind crests, like forget it. I mean, you would never want to send like a proper fast car over that. Like that's like a config for spec Miatas. That is not, I'm so glad we're not doing that. But yeah, it's that was pretty funny. But once we got past that, I mean, we had a small issue with an oil pressure sensor, so I pulled it back in. As when that happened, I pulled it back in to fix that, and then our first session was really kind of the second session. But yeah, it was everything. I would say went exactly how we hoped. We were able to turn laps basically the entire session for most of the sessions, and that's what I needed. And we're still on the steep end of the learning curve, figuring the car out, and again, me getting comfortable with trusting the car.
Do you recall what I mean, I'm just trying to give you a start to finish type thing, but do you recall what like the first hot lap of the event was in comparison to the end lap?
I want to say I got into with my first in the second session where I was the first time I got to actually, kind of get after it. I think I was in the 49s, and I had already told myself like, we got to be sub 50, going into it. I'm not really knowing exactly what times are going to look like.
Exactly.
But I was like, got to be sub 50. So, I was happy to see that, definitely. And that progressively, just keep chipping away at it. But I mean, it took a lot of, there's definitely there's the complexity of the track with all the blind crests and everything that take time to figure out and trust. And there's trusting what the car will do. The turn, I think it's 8, which is the high speed left. You accelerate out of kind of the complex section, and there's a flat left that's just a kink, and then you've got 8 where you're uh, got to shed some speed, turn through that at a pretty high speed. Uh, that by the end of the first day, I'm not using brakes. I'm just lifting. I'm not convinced I need to be lifting, you know? And it's like the
Wow.
second day was, I think the first session, we swapped pulleys on the supercharger. So it was making about 50 more horsepower than it had been the day before. And I went through that the first time just flat. And I just full speed and just turned. And then, like, and it did it, it stuck. And it wasn't even dramatic. Like, I'm sure it probably had another 3 or 4 miles an hour that, like, it would have still done that. But that was the speed I could get to from, the last braking zone.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So for Thunderhill, how much of that, because there's some other tracks where you've got some of those kinks, and now granted, and this is something we mentioned on the live stream, which is the nice thing about Thunderhill is that you can go off, which I believe we saw you go off maybe 1 or 2 times. I think there was one time at turn 3 where you went off. You went a good ways, but we said,
Oh yeah.
the nice thing is that there's nothing out there to hit, right? So there's not a lot of consequence. But still, with that being said, I mean, through some of those really high speed turns, are there times where you say, maybe I don't need to go 10 tenths here because the risk is too much, or, I'm going to, because the time, right, I'm only going to shave a tenth. There are other places where I can push harder and I can find a lot more time.
so, I mean, that's Thunderhill is a good example. There's a bunch of other tracks that are also good examples. Button Willow is one of them. Chuck Wall is one of them. That, like, I really like tracks that, if you're watching professional wheel-to-wheel racing, like, it's actually more entertaining to have a track that's very punishing to the drivers if they make a mistake. Walls are close. Drivers going over, the hill at Bathurst. It's like, you want to see them scraping their mirrors against a wall. Like, that's awesome to see. But, like, from a standpoint of a guy who's just building a car in the shop and pouring his, time and money into it, and then goes out to race the thing, the last thing that he wants is this really high stakes section that's like, if you want to be fast, you have to send it here. And if you get it a little bit wrong, write the thing off.
Yep.
Like, that's not fun. That part of that concept is not a fun thing to me, right? Like, I want to do this again tomorrow. So I love tracks that are relatively forgiving. I like to push it. I don't go, it does take me time to trust the car and figure the track out and everything. But, like, even from the first session, like, I start trying to push. I'm not going to have fun going out there at 8 tenths and being like, well, that was good. Let's get some tire temperatures. Like, I want to be pushing, and that's the whole point of the car. So if I can have a track where I can do that with relatively, a lower level of, like,
Risk.
if this goes wrong, I'm wadding it up. That's nice. There's plenty of adrenaline, regardless. Like, I don't need to be scraping the side of the car against the wall to, like, feel it,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
Thunderhill is good for that.
yeah. So I mean, obviously, you guys had a fairly good weekend throughout the whole time. I will say, Jaeger and I appreciated that you were out there for most every session, even as it got hotter. You're still out there churning some laps. Kept the car in one piece. But tell me how you can go and break a car so badly when getting towed in off the track.
Yeah, I didn't have this one on my bingo card, that's for sure. So the weekend went great. It was the very last. Well, it was going to be our last session. I was actually the third session of day 2, but we knew, you could see the times falling off. I mean, like, the entire grid was going slower, and I was still finding little pieces, but they were tiny because it was just getting, surface temperature was skyrocketing, and but I still knew that there were a couple little spots where I just if I could connect it a little bit better. And at my best time, talking about, I had done somewhere in the 49s. My best time now at that point was a 46 flat. And I wanted that 45 so badly. It's just one of those things, right? Time attackers always just want that little bit extra. And so that last session, pushing it in the heat, and I found half a second. Looking back in the data, I found half a second. But I wasn't connecting it in other places. I had figured out what I was not quite putting together in one section, but there were other places that, the tires just weren't quite so happy, et cetera. And I just kept doing laps, just telling myself like, oh, maybe one more, and so I made a little error through the last double right-hander that leads onto the front straight. And I was just, a few inches further inside at the apex leading onto the straight. And there's a gnarly curb there that's just pretty tall. And I mean, I had even seen some of like the YouTube videos. People are like giving you a run through of the track. They're like, don't hit that curb. Nothing good will come of it. And part of the reason they say that is it's a lot like Sunset at Button Willow, which is, this is the only place that there's a wall. If you get the car unsettled and you spin it here, you can actually damage the car. Try to avoid this, and it's not the fast way through because it's going to upset the car a lot. So I hit that curb and the right side of the car picked up in the air, and there was air under the tire for a moment, and I came back down and got back on the throttle probably at just the wrong moment, and something snapped and suddenly clack, 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 clack. And it's really obvious that something had broken. So I got it off the track surface over in dirt, and the sound and the feeling, and the sort of the feeling through the chassis that I'm hearing, the clanging, is like, all right, that's a busted axle, probably the CV. And I've driven the car on a busted axle. I've been towed with one, didn't think anything of it. Tow truck pulls up, guy just hops out. They're trying to keep the sessions going and everything. He hooks up and he starts pulling me. And this is one of those trucks that doesn't have like a rear facing guy or anything like that. So at that point, I'm kind of like along for the ride. He's driving, and the car starts like kind of crab walking as it's getting pulled, and I'm like, this does not feel good. And as soon as we're not moving fast, we're moving maybe 15, 20 miles an hour. But like as soon as I get back on the track surface and I'm not on the dirt, the version of it that this happens in a split second, but suddenly, and like there's just a violent kind of launching of the car into the air. And I'm stunned and I don't know what exactly just happened, but it kind of like launches into the air and lands and then like kind of hops. And it happens so quickly. The truck driver like realizes, he sees in his mirror, like what is the car flying behind me for? He hits the brakes. But people say, so what we figure happened is, and of course there's a lot of damaged stuff now. So you're trying to like look at a bunch of broken things and think, well, what do we think broke first? We're pretty sure that the diff mounts broke, and that took out the axle because the diff then was moving all over the place. And with the diff mounts broken, somehow the drive shaft came out of the transmission. And that, or the nose of the diff actually leaned down far enough that either the diff nose or the nose of the drive shaft dug into the concrete and just like a pogo stick just punted the entire differential out of the back of the car. And the force of that launched me into the air. So that was exciting. People that were at the track said that they could see the wheels of the car like above the hot pit wall. So it launched pretty good. And you're not going to do something like that and not break a lot of stuff, that's attached. So I've been tearing it apart, inspecting things, figuring out the scope of stuff. And then when the car is in the air and the tow truck's still pulling forward and the car kind of rotates, it actually folded the tow hook sideways. So I've got some crunch parts on the hood, and I've got some stuff in at the shock tower where the tow hook mounted that I've got to cut out and weld back in.
Good thing you got some molds to, make a new hood.
Yeah, I think that actually it's salvageable.
Okay.
I'm
Good.
pretty sure I can patch things together and not have to remake a whole thing. But that's going to be. And actually, right now I'm dealing with stuff that requires welding because that needs to go to powder coating. So just like working on a timeline of like what stuff will take the most time.
I mean, it is very beneficial that the ridge is still in another 2 months or so, in August. So you've got some time. You're not under a huge time crunch.
No, yeah, I mean, I've kind of definitely over like the past week as I've gotten a full sort of understanding of what needs to happen to fix the car, plus the fact that you know, we left Thunderhill with a list of like, here's what we need to do to improve. And now I'm frustrated because I'm fixing the car instead of doing the improvements,
Yeah.
and I don't want to sacrifice anything and go, well, we just have to fix it. It's like, I think that we'll probably not do the ridge.
Okay.
I, for me, the unfinished business, the point of the car is Button Willow. So I want to prioritize that, especially since we just I kind of ended up with a bunch of extra work to
Homework.
do. Um, yeah, the list is like differential, drive shaft, axles, all the rear control arms, rear subframe, fuel tank, uh, bunch of things in the front. It's and everything's kind of custom. So
Yeah.
it's enough. Oh, and the frame is bent, so I've cut the frame out, and that's the one thing that I did first was I cut the damaged piece of the frame out and built a new piece and welded that in. But yeah, and
Wow.
just tons of measuring,
Mm.
making sure everything's square and this and that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Button Willow is definitely the focus.
I think
Wow.
that's a very smart way to go about it. It's very easy to get kind of fixated on I want to do the whole schedule, I want to make it to all these events. It'd be very easy to say like let's just go and try to really push towards the ridge and get that accomplished. But I think you're in a better position, and you'll probably obviously get the car fixed, get it going, and then go do some test days at Button Willow, get yourself prepared, get the car dialed in, and then have a really good chance at Button Willow and putting down your best time. And I think, I mean, for people like me and Kilgore, that's really exciting because that way, when we look at when I look at this eventual, you know, clash of the titans at Button Willow, it's going to be a much more fantastic event if you're not rushing together and trying to get this thing done to go to the ridge to then fix some other things and get some other things built to come back for Button Willow. To take that time, effort, and put it all into your, eggs all into one basket of the Button Willow basket. I think it's a smarter choice in terms of getting everything ready. Is there? I'll have to ask this then. So, is there any big upgrades? Any other things that you see after your couple of test days in this one event? Well, let's pause for a quick second. So, at this event, you did finish second overall, or second overall, right?
Yep.
Yeah, second overall. So quite the stout showing for your first GTA back. So I just really wanted to kind of step on that and like harp on that for a second. Like that is a really amazing outcome for you and your team to be able to go to an event for the first time after 5 years off. And I mean, let's just say what the reality is. Not these people haven't gotten slower. We've literally just seen people go faster and faster and faster over the last few years. You have to contend with every super on the planet. So you always have to watch out for those guys and M2s and BMWs and blah, blah, blah. So now, it's a whole new world out there. So it's really exciting to see you come back after 5 years and have such success on that first event. I mean, I'm sure you're probably in the back of your head going, man, I'd love to have come out that number one spot. But I will say this, sometimes getting number two right off the gate can motivate you a little bit more than getting that number one right out the gate. So,
100%.
so what are we looking at, Ryan? What are we looking at?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't think, obviously you always go into an event going, wouldn't it be great to win, but my realistic expectations weren't that we were going to just come out and crush everybody, knowing how quick that class has become, and which is very cool to see, because I feel like when I took the car down, we had won, like I said, every event in 2018. We went a little backwards in 2018 or 2019, but I was looking at us going, there's a better recipe here than what we're doing, and we're winning. Like, it felt like limited was not, street class was crushing it. A lot of quick guys in street class, and you'd have events where street class was a second off of limited, and then obviously if you get some fast unlimited guys, you're going to see some times that are really on fire. But limited was kind of the sleeper class, right?
Yes,
a lot
it
of times
was.
people graduate there from street, add a couple of things, that force them into limited, but it's not really built to be a limited class car, So since I haven't been racing, it's been really cool to see that class sort of come alive. And now we're seeing really competitive times with limited, to the point that, like, you go to Thunderhill and, unfortunately Tony had some mechanical issues right out of the gate, but, like, you've got people running in unlimited, but limited class is actually faster. That's cool to see for me, because, to build a car that doesn't have any competition wouldn't really be very satisfying.
Always,
Um,
yeah.
but it's really definitely rewarding to see a lot of potential in the car, to get the car back up and running and start seeing lap times that are like, all right, we can work with this. I mean, a lot of the things about the build were like, well, until we get it back on track and start seeing times, is this the right thing to do? Like, those wheels and tires, that's 50 pounds of rotational unsprung weight that we added to the car. Is it really going to be faster at the end of that? It's like you doubt it, to some degree, right? You're like, on paper, this makes sense, but I don't know. So that's been great. I want to, we're taking the opportunity with the stuff that's broken to upgrade some stuff. It had a stock rear subframe. I have a tubular subframe that's going in now. So that's going to improve I think that things were flexing back there a little more than we would like. So, probably some dynamic alignment changes that you can't measure statically, that were happening. And so it should be more consistent now. Things like that. One of the big things that we have in the works, and it just has been kind of since January, but it takes some time, is we're partnered with Olin's now. And so they are coming on board, and we're working with Inertia Labs to put together a set of TTX shops for the car.
That'll be interesting.
So that will be that's another one of those things that I think will be, another incremental improvement, just more consistency. It'll do little things better, here and there, but you hope that all that stuff is going to be. And we're hoping to get together with Olin's at some point and get the car out east and to their shop where we can put it on the shaker rig and fine tune things. That'll take a little time because they're on the other side of the country, but that's kind of all in the cards. So we're going to get that in the car right now, since everything's stripped out of it. But yeah, Moti's working on some more aero stuff. We've got some revisions and sort of evolution there that we've got coming. And the biggest thing is, a lot of time attack cars don't get enough runtime and enough fine tuning to really extract what they can do. So instead of, there's a lot to be said for learning it and devoting the time to make it all work cohesively, instead of just assuming that you've got to keep throwing big, massive chunks of things at it to try to get more lap time out of it. I think we have a good recipe, and we just need to, do that small evolution. The 5 years happened, all the big changes happened. Now it's about, honing it.
So the major question is, do you think you have a shot at the record at Willow in November?
Well, again, I love that we have some really crazy competition in the class now. Um, I built the car to set a new limited rear-wheel drive record. And, then somebody comes along and does it like the year before I get the car back together, right? So, I mean, massive kudos to him for that. That's where we want to be. I mean, you can want to set a certain lap time, though. At the end of the day, you got to go out there and do it, put all the pieces together. I really do think that the raw potential is there, and we just need to, put it all together. So, yeah, he's going to get faster as well, though.
Yep.
No doubt, right? I mean, the car's already, I think, quicker than it was last year. So when we're at Button Willow, it's like you don't need to be setting the time that would have won last year. You need to be setting something faster, and that's how it should be. So,
I mean, I'm just needing what I need. This is what I'm going to say right now. What I need from you and Bailey is to force each other to run every session all day, all night. Like, I want to see people having to push the sweat dripping off your faces in November. Just remember that, guys, in Southern California, as we try to push to go to the fastest laps humanly possible. And I want to see everybody just pushing every session the entire way, and just records being set. I mean, obviously from our point of view, I want to see records set from him, records set from you, records set for, I mean, just, and then wherever the dominoes lie at the end, I mean, that would always be I mean, I'll be honest with you. We just, got back from Thunderhill, where the Type R battle was going on at Thunderhill, which we hope to have some of those guys on here soon. Because that was incredibly awesome to watch those guys just battle the entire time. And it was just the same with you and Bailey there, where he set a really quick time early on, and we just kept watching you inch towards, move a little bit. Lap times tumble every time you went out. And obviously we're rooting you on to try to see if you can get just close enough to really push that envelope. Obviously, and then the incident happened with your vehicle, kind of rendering you helpless in that sense. But I'm excited, man. I'm super excited to see what you're going to do with the HyperMiata, and really interested to see what kind of mods you can do. And maybe one day we'll see an 800 horsepower HyperMiata coming down the straight.
Oh man.
Because what I have to ask, what was the top speed at Thunderhill?
142.
Yeah, that's pretty. I will say that's
Not
pretty
fast.
low in comparison to other people that we heard, talking about their lap times and their speeds. I mean, people were talking in the 150s and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, I changed the gearing just before the event because we had been on a longer ratio rear end. And we were like not using half of the fourth. And I was like, you kind of have to guess it for a new track, but I'm kind of looking at the speeds that, you see cars doing. And it's like, I really think that we need to be shorter gearing on this. And it worked out perfectly. We were like bouncing off the rev limiter in fourth, just right at the end of the straight before it would, I'd turn into turn one. So we were using all of it. But yeah, 142 miles an hour, it's like that's not the strength of the car. It never has been.
Yeah.
That's not what a Miata is about,
Nope.
to some degree, right? Like the Miata is all about minimum speed. It's all about, making that long section of complex corners vanish faster than anybody else in the, in the group.
You're right.
And obviously you've got to have some amount of power, because otherwise, you just can't make up the deficit on the straights. But thankfully, it's sad to see Super Lap Battle at COTA look like it's not going to be a thing anymore. But I mean, to a degree, that's kind of good for us. This car, it's about places like Button Willow, where more power is good, but it's not going to be the deciding factor necessarily.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, Ryan, we are going to wrap this episode up. We're going to do it with some rapid fire questions.
Oh, no.
I want to get your answers. No explanation needed, just your gut reaction. And let's see where you land. All right.
All right.
You ready? Here we go. Power or suspension mods?
Power versus
Power
one.
or
One
suspension?
or the
Like,
other.
Okay, yeah.
you could choose one. Which one would you choose?
Suspension every time.
All right, suspension or aero?
Oh, darn! It hurts me to say suspension.
Oh, all right.
But I mean, if you have a stock car, you bolt a bunch of aero on it, like this is going to be awful.
No explanation
Yeah.
needed. I
No
get it.
explanation needed.
I think we're gonna know the answer to this one, but you might surprise us. Domestic, Euro, or JDM?
Oh, 100% JDM.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. What's the favorite track you've driven?
Really like Laguna Seca.
Okay.
Killer track.
I'm gonna say this. Quick pause. I'm gonna say this. Jaeger may. We may have said this before, but I think Jaeger may stop doing the podcast after I say this. But after seeing and kind of watching doing the live stream at Thunderhill, you've got Sonoma, you've got Laguna. Man, I think NorCal really has the better tracks over SoCal. I'm just saying it.
This quality of tracks, hands down, right?
Yes.
I mean, all of those tracks have nice facilities, really good quality service, all that stuff. I don't know, being a Time Attack diehard fan, Button Willow is where, everybody measures each other. So, I'm sure there's a bunch of nostalgia there that like really isn't very well founded. It's like Button Willow is kind of a crap track.
It is. It is. It is. It's not
Well,
bad, but anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Rear wheel drive, front wheel drive, or all wheel drive?
Rear wheel drive.
All right. Manual, sequential, or paddle shifting?
Paddles.
All right.
Let's see.
Driver aids or analog?
No, analog. That's how the car is now. There's nothing.
Oh, wow. Okay. What is a car that you would like to have an opportunity to drive in the future? Like out on track in anger?
The future version of my car.
Okay. All right. And what about a track that you were looking forward to driving here in the future? A new track, a track you haven't done before.
Sure. Yeah. Oh man, my sights are like so firmly set on Button Willow. Like I don't even ask myself questions like that. It would be really fun to go and do the Ultimate Track Car Challenge, which is now at Eagles Canyon Raceway, and it looks like a really fun track. So that's on the list. I don't think we'll do it this year because it's 2 weeks before Button Willow.
Yeah.
But that'd be cool to do. I mean,
Okay.
Kodo was the one for so long, but now that I have, I'm really glad that I've been able to do that.
Okay. All right. And last one, records or championships?
Records.
Records all day.
If I don't
All
say
right.
that, I just might as well stop
He's-
doing this thing.
He's not even, are you even a time attacker? All right. Well, Ryan, thank you for being on here. It was such a pleasure to get to learn more about the HyperMiata. How can people keep up with you and what's going on with the car and your exploits?
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. You can probably just Google HyperMiata and you're going to get most of the socials for that. The Instagram is at AKA The Pass. The Pass is my nickname. But it'll also bring up, if you search HyperMiata, you can get the Facebook and stuff. Goodwin Racing is, where I'm, putting in the hours every single day, and people can call and ask questions. People do every day, and what do you want to do with your Miata? Let's talk suspension or whatever. So, we are Miata specialists. So if you call me in with your BMW, I'm going to tell you I have no idea. But yeah, Miata guys, give us a ring. And as far as partners, I've mentioned some of them. Blackbird Fabworks is a huge one. He's been a mentor to me with fabrication as well. UMS Tuning, Inky Wheels, CSF Radiators. I've got to make sure I don't forget anybody. Epsilon and Illum Aesthetic, Magic Developed, and VA Roadsters. I'll also give a shout out to Miata Hubs. They're not technically a sponsor, but they had a big hand in us being able to make it to Southwest Speed Festival. They were overnighting stuff to us, so they are definitely a part of it.
Excellent. Well, be sure and keep up with Ryan and what all he's got going on. We are very much excited to see you at Button Willow Global Time Attack Finals. It's going to be a pretty big event. Looking forward to how that all shakes out. You can keep up with Jager and I on our Instagram at Perfect Lap Podcast. Check that out. We're going to be keeping you guys up to date with what else is going on in the time attack world. You can also check out our website at perfectlappodcast.com. If you want to email us, email the show at maximumattack@perfeclappodcast.com. We're releasing episodes every other Thursday, so be on the lookout for those as we drop those for you. You can find us on any of your favorite podcast platforms. As always, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Ryan Passey and the HyperMiata. For all you time attackers out there, keep pushing, go fast, take chances. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, guys.